Back in September of 2024, my partner and I took some days off work. We dropped the kids off at grandma's and we decided to go on the biggest road trip that we'd done so far. The plan for the trip was to start it in Évora, here in Portugal, then drive into Spain to the town of Caceres, then Salamanca, eventually Bilbao up north, and then we would drive all the way to Messange in France, where we would meet our friends Brandon, Sonia and their tiny human Mila, and then we would head back into Spain to a place called Las Bardenas Reales, and then eventually drive back into Portugal to meet up with the family again. The plan for the trip was to start it in Évora, here in Portugal, then drive into Spain to the town of Caceres, then Salamanca, eventually Bilbao up north, and then we would drive all the way to Messange in France, where we would meet our friends Brandon, Sonia and their tiny human Mila, and then we would head back into Spain to a place called Las Bardenas Reales, and then eventually drive back into Portugal to meet up with the family again. On the first leg of the trip from Évora to Caceres, Vanessa spotted an interesting collection of buildings on the side of the road, and after being on the road for a few hours already, we took the opportunity to stretch our legs for a bit and to try to find a nearby location where we could actually grab lunch at, and I took a few photos at this location for the sake of documenting it, but to be fair, these are super plain, though I thought that it would still be interesting to include them in the video and to show you all what we've been up to. After leaving this location, we then drove for another half an hour, I think, and eventually made it to the town of Caceres, where we struggled a bit to find a place to have lunch at, but eventually found a poke, like an Asian place, to have food at, and afterwards decided to explore the old city center just for a bit, and also take some photos as we were just passing by and wouldn't actually spend the night there. I honestly find it super interesting seeing my approach to subjects and like my overall environment when visiting new cities in new countries, because I find myself shooting a lot more of street photography and to play around with just random strangers, subjects, bypassers, and in this case I also played around with contrasting shadows, like with the hard light, with the harsh shadows, and I honestly find it super interesting. This place was actually relatively small and we've easily covered most of the places to visit within an hour and really enjoyed the architecture and the sandy tones of the buildings around us, and it's also really nice to see such old buildings and structures being so well taken care of and maintained. And just like that, we were on the road again and on our way to Salamanca, where we would actually spend the night at. We actually arrived there late. It was like the end of the afternoon and we headed to the place where we were staying at, dropped the bags off. I thought about shooting, taking a few photos outside, but honestly I was super drained, super tired from the whole trip, and it was hot as well. I don't do heat very well. Yeah, we just decided to go out to have dinner, walk a bit around town at night, super pretty with all the lights and everyone outside enjoying the good weather, having a meal, having a drink. You just hear like people talking, chatting, laughing. There's a bunch of human interactions all around you, and it was super cool. But yeah, I didn't take my camera with me. Honestly, I wasn't feeling it, and there was no light as well, and I just wanted to stretch my legs for a bit, go for a walk with Vanessa, and just leave the camera at the hostel. Anyway, we went out for dinner to this really nice Asian restaurant, and after we finished our meal, we headed to a local supermarket because Vanessa and I just love visiting supermarkets when we're abroad. Let me know in the comments if you like doing it as well, but we just love looking at like different types of foods and drinks and snacks. Speaking of which, after we left the supermarket with snacks, obviously, we headed back into the hostel, and basically the end of the day for us was grabbing snacks, crappy food, and watching Catfish the movie. You heard me right, that was the end to our day, and I loved it. The following morning we went out for breakfast and stumbled across a random tattoo shop that actually was advertising €30 tattoo flashes on their window, and they were taking walk-ins, so I think you see where this is going, right? Yeah, we got tattoos, if that wasn't clear, but sadly I didn't take any pictures of the whole process, I didn't take any video of it. This was like super random and spontaneous, which was even cooler, honestly. Like, we had breakfast and we went for random tattoos in the morning, early morning, so that's what we do. So after getting our tattoos done, we decided to go for a walk around town, and we passed by the Gringotts Bank from the Harry Potter movies. We went to a place called Plaza Mayor, which is a massive square located right in the middle of Salamanca, and this place is surrounded by incredible architecture, and it's a place that I'd seen a ton of times, and it was quite cool to actually be able to go there and to see it in person. We went to a few other spots around town and grabbed the usual souvenirs for friends and family, grabbed a few snacks for the roads, and after taking a few more photos around town, we headed back to the car, and just like that we were on our way to Bilbao. Driving around for hours in Spain was cool, however there weren't necessarily a ton of photo opportunities, although the landscape is beautiful, and it was super interesting to watch the weather changing as we moved up north, and to also see the plain fields in the distance changing into mountains as we got closer to the Pyrenees region. This last part of the trip from Salamanca to Bilbao was definitely one that I enjoyed, and Bilbao itself looks super cool. However, it was already super dark when we got there, and we basically just went out for dinner and drinks and came back to the hotel. The next morning the weather was super overcast and I didn't take many photos apart from the areas close to the hotel where we were staying at. However, we did have a lovely breakfast, went out for fresh bread, had a really nice local bakery, took a walk by the river, and the plan was to visit the famous Guggenheim museum. However, once we saw the queue, we decided to only go in and check their souvenir and bookshop and decided to just hang around the outside, where I took some shots from the museum, which looks incredible. In hindsight, we probably should have bought tickets online to go to the museum, but at the same time we didn't actually want to commit with like a time and date and potentially waste money to go to the museum and then being super tired and not wanting to go there or to hate it. So there's always next time and we would love to go back to Bilbao. Not everything was lost though, because at least I was able to take photos of this creepy looking mind flayer thing. As cool as Bilbao was, we were super excited about this last leg of the trip into France, as we wanted to be able to rest and stay at a place for longer than just a night, as all those hours on the road were definitely catching up to us. We went up the mountains from Bilbao, crossed the border, and after driving for just over an hour, we were quite close to our friend's location and decided to make a quick stop at a local supermarket to buy foods and more crappy snacks. We finally arrived at our friend's house late in the afternoon and were super happy to see them, as it had been quite a while since we last saw them when they stayed at our place in Portugal, and basically spent the rest of the evening catching up and drinking Brandon's famous Negronis, which are amazing. We also bought their kids, Mila, a camera, and I was super hyped about gifting her very first camera, so this was definitely a very special moment. What are you doing, Mila?
Everyone, it's like read the room, bro.
Everyone was actually watching it.
It's like,
Wow.
These are the blue camera. There's a blue
and then
camera
I was sitting next to the guy, and he was like, yeah, but my dreams be like this, and I was like,
Brandon and Sonia were super nice and showed us around a bunch of cool locations next to where they live, and I basically took shots of random spots and things that I found interesting, and let me tell you, there's a bunch of those spots around the place where they live. It's a shame that I didn't record a lot more footage than I actually did, but honestly I preferred not to at the time because I really wanted to make the most out of being with them, and wanting to visit them was what actually made us plan this whole trip in the first place, so I guess it was definitely a good trade-off. This next location was one that I actually pinned on my Google Maps and that I wanted to visit whilst in France.
How's it, mate?
One morning we left the girls to do their thing, and Brandon and I decided to drive down to a beach that has a bunch of World War II bunkers, and I was super hyped to shoot some bangers on black and white film. And this was actually the only black and white film roll that I shot, and it was actually my first time shooting with AGFA APX 400, which honestly produced good results despite being a bit too grainy for my taste, but it's definitely not bad for a cheap 400 ISO film. Anyway, the bunkers. There's not a lot of history about these online, and these were just a few of the many bunkers spread across France, but there was a particular one that looked super interesting and stood tall amongst the other ones, who seemed to have either been swallowed by the sandy dunes, and some of them actually looked like they've been bombed, which makes sense, right? We took a bunch of pictures there and went up to this beach where there was a ton of beautiful driftwood, and I thought it looked super cool, so I took a few photos there as well, and once we felt like we'd seen everything, we packed the cameras and made our way back to the car. Overall, I think these photos turned out good, but nothing to brag about. However, I did really enjoy this quick photo trip and spending time with my bro, Brandon. That night we went out for pizza and walked around another beautiful location that they showed us. I actually can't remember the name, but once again I immediately regretted not taking my camera because that location was so good. The light was amazing, it was by a beach, by the ocean, like a super quaint looking location. And anyway, you just have to take my word for it, but that was the end to our day and it was lovely. The next morning was definitely an exciting one because we'd all made plans to go and visit the coastal town of Biarritz, and I made some of my favorite photos from the trip there, and Brandon and Sonia had actually been there previously, so they were our guides for the day. After leaving the car, we headed down to the beach, and this location provided for a bunch of cool photo opportunities, which I totally took advantage of. And I took a few portraits of the tiny human, and we spent some time there and then made our way back into the city center of Biarritz. In this location I was shooting a mix of digital using my Fujifilm X-T4, and I also had some shots left on the AGFA APX400 roll, the black and white film that I started shooting the previous day. And once again I found myself gravitating towards shooting just strangers and bypasses, and I included a lot of those elements in my photos, which again I find super interesting. So as I've just mentioned, some of my favorite photos from the trip were shot in Biarritz, but this shot of the people laying in the sun at the beach is definitely my favorite one. I just love the way that the people are laying in sort of straight lines on the bottom half of the image, and then we have the top half of the image where people are just randomly laying in the sand and kinda cause this irregular pattern on the photo, which wouldn't look nearly as cool in my opinion if this shot had been taken with color film. This also goes to show that I should definitely shoot more black and white film on sunny days and not just save it for overcast days. The rest of the stay in Massange consisted of more Negronis, taking casual photos here and there, hanging out with Mila, and obviously sharing creepy stories between the three of us after Mila went to bed. Before we left though, I wanted to take some portraits of the three of them together, and I honestly was quite happy with these results. These are a mix of flash and no flash photos taken with the last frames of the AGFA roll, and I was super happy with the results, and after sharing the photos with them, it seems they were super happy with them as well, so that makes me super happy. last morning in Massange was hard because we had to say goodbye to our friends, but at the same time Vanessa and I felt like it was time to move on with our trip, and we decided to head down into the Bardenas Reales in Spain. And Vanessa was super hyped because we had booked this super cute wooden cabin in the middle of nowhere, and she was definitely looking forward to spending a few hours by herself, and I was honestly super hyped to spend several hours shooting by myself in the deserts. And yes, you heard me right, the deserts. So, short story about Las Bardenas Reales. I was one day, like I do often, checking Google Maps for possible photo locations or random photo locations that I'd like to visit one day, and I stumbled across this deserted area in the north of Spain called Las Bardenas Reales, and I had to dig deeper and search for photos and videos from this location, and instantly fell in love with its landscape that kinda looked like something straight out of this world. Before we get into it though, I want to show you another location that we found, and it's located at one of the entrances to the natural park of Las Bardenas Reales, and it's a location called Las Cuevas in Arguedas. So believe it or not, these houses were inhabited until the 60s, and it seems that this type of houses were built by lower income families, and they could literally build a house by digging into the mountainside, and they could easily expand them towards the inside of the mountain if needed. Apparently all houses were built facing the same direction to take advantage of the natural light, as the people that lived there didn't have access to electricity, and many of these houses were actually sort of like animal sheds, given that most of the people there were farmers. By 1940, 52 of these houses had already been dug into the mountain, and they were finally abandoned in the 60s due to the Spanish government building social housing to accommodate its families. I found it super cool that we can simply go inside these houses and have a peek into these past lives, and it's super surreal to be inside a home that's been dug into the mountain, and this straight up reminds me of the planet Tatooine from the Star Wars universe. I took a few photos from the outside of the houses as well as from the inside, and although these houses are quite similar to one another, there's a bunch of unique touches left by their previous residents, such as firewood stoves, kitchen counters made of stone, and one house adds a cast iron oven. Overall, we found this location to be super interesting, and it was super fun going up the mountain and jumping from house to house. Okay, now back to the Bardenas Reales. This is a massive nature park located in the region of Navarra that has been shaped by the combined forces of the water, the wind and the sun for over millions of years, which created these surreal looking mountains and rugged landscapes. Honestly, the landscape here looks kinda alien in the sense that it's quite unique and that I'd never seen anything like it before, and it's no wonder that it's been a location chosen to shoot a bunch of different movies, such as 007 The World Is Not Enough. They shot Game of Thrones there. They shot a film by Ridley Scott called The Counselor, and from what I checked online, they shot a bunch of different movies and TV shows there. Okay, so let's backtrack here for a minute. We got to the cabin very late in the afternoon and the sun was already hiding behind the mountains in the distance, but I still managed to take a few shots from around the property where we were staying at before starting to be eaten alive by mosquitoes. Those buggers loved me, and despite me being covered in bug spray from head to toe, they still managed to get me pretty badly, and the rest of the night was super chill and we basically drank, ate a bunch of junk food and watched a movie. The next morning I woke up and decided to make some good old instant coffee and took a few photos of the cabin that was now being lit by the morning sunlight, and this definitely helped with revealing a lot of details that I couldn't see the previous night when we'd arrived because it was so dark. And I also took a few portraits of Vanessa, which in my opinion turned out great, and after getting some food and grabbing my camera bag, finally went out to shoot to all the locations that I'd pinned on Google Maps. So this park is ginormous, and it took me pretty much like an hour to drive from the cabin to the first location that I wanted to shoot at, and the roads were completely full of like potholes and loose gravel, loose rocks, and for this trip we actually decided to take our own personal car, so I had to be super careful with it. But like the whole drive was a tease because I could see the mountains in the distance, I could see the location where I wanted to get to, but I just couldn't be driving more than in like, I don't know, like second gear, third gear was already too much because all of the loose rock would just start hitting the car from like the sides and from like underneath it. So long trip just to get there, super worth it though. There's a bunch of abandoned old buildings scattered around the park, and I'm not sure what their purpose was in the past. However, I did see a couple of them in good condition, and it seems that they're being used as hunting cabins. Despite having planned to shoot at several different locations there, the reality was that some of them were quite far apart from one another, and I honestly didn't have enough time to visit all of them, so I went with my gut and played around with the time that I had left to cover as many spots as possible, and that's what I did. I honestly could say a lot more things about the Bardenas Reales, and I had planned to do a bunch of talking head shots there, but the reality was that it was super windy, although it might not look like it in the footage. Again, I just wanted to ensure that I would grab enough footage from all the places that I'd been to, and I also wanted to ensure that I didn't waste too much time filming, because my main focus is always to ensure that I get the photos taken, if that makes sense. So when I say that this location was amazing and kinda alien-like, the alien part that I mentioned is not just about like the rugged landscape in the distance and the mountain and the way that the mountain peaks are cutting like towards the sky. Small things like when I was walking from the car to said mountains, I was walking on like dried lakes, and the surface of the lake, instead of having like mud or just regular dirt, it adds dirt that was all cracked because it was dry. But then on top there was a layer of like, you know that fake glass that's used in Hollywood productions and TV shows when someone goes through a glass window or you hit someone with a glass bottle in the head? That kind of like hard sugar. It's like the surface of the lake, and all the places that I was walking on were covered in like a thin layer of this glass, this hard sugar. It was surreal. So sadly, the next day we had to say goodbye to Las Bardenas Reales, and we actually had to start making our way back into Portugal. And on this day we had quite a long drive ahead of us, and we drove for like 8 hours, I think. But we had to come back home. We were missing our dogs, we were missing our family, and the plan wasn't to head straight to home actually. We were going to a location called Montargil, which is relatively close to where Vanessa's mom lives in the southern region of Portugal, and yeah, we went there. So this part of the trip wasn't that exciting photography-wise, however, I still managed to grab a few photos that turned out alright. We had a lake by the Airbnb where we were staying at and had access to a paddleboard and a canoe, so obviously we spent these last days playing in the water, and there was also a lot of drinking and eating. It was super nice to be able to spend these last days of the holidays with the family and to be able to talk to them about all of our experiences during the trip, which made for some really cool conversations. So as good as the trip was, it was finally time to start packing up, loading everything onto the car, grabbing our girls, and we decided to make our way back home. This was our very first big road trip and we loved every minute of it. I would like to thank my partner Vanessa for all the funny and special moments. It was definitely an amazing trip, and I would like to thank you if you're still watching this video, because I've been rambling for like I don't know how long the video is gonna be, but you've been definitely listening to me ramble for far too long. Anyway, I appreciate it, and if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing as well to keep up with my content. Drop a like because it definitely helps a lot with the algorithm. And let me know in the comments if you had any favorite photo from the trip, any favorite location. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.